In the late 1960s, Northern California was a peaceful place for many young people. Teenagers often went on late-night drives, couples met at quiet parks, and small towns felt safe. But in December 1968, something happened that would begin one of the most famous unsolved crime mysteries in American history. A killer was about to appear, and the world would later know him as the Zodiac Killer. On the night of December 20th, 1968, two teenagers drove to a quiet area on Lake Herman Road between the towns of Vallejo and Benicia in California. The couple was David Faraday, who was 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16. Like many young couples, they simply wanted a quiet place to spend time together. They parked their car near a gravel turnout along the dark road. The area was lonely and surrounded by open land. Sometime late that night, another car arrived. What happened next would shock the local community. An unknown man approached the couple. Evidence later showed that he forced them out of their car. Moments later, gunshots broke the silence of the night. David Faraday was shot at close range, and Betty Lou Jensen tried to run away, but was also shot and killed. Their bodies were later discovered by passing drivers. Police quickly began an investigation. At first, officers thought the crime might be connected to a personal conflict or a robbery. However, there were no signs that anything had been stolen. The attack seemed random and senseless. Investigators searched for witnesses and clues, but the area was dark and quiet that night. No one clearly saw the killer. For several months, the case remained a mystery. Then, on July 4th, 1969, another violent attack happened not far away. A young couple was sitting in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. The victims were Michael Mageau and his girlfriend, Darlene Ferrin. It was late at night when a car pulled up behind them. At first, the man inside the car seemed to leave, but a few minutes later he returned. The stranger got out of his vehicle and walked toward the couple's car with a flashlight. Without warning, he began shooting into the car. Both victims were badly wounded. Darlene Ferrin later died from her injuries, but Michael Mageau survived. Because he survived, Michael Mageau was able to give police an important description. He said the attacker was a white man with a heavy build. However, the attack happened very quickly and in the dark, so the description was limited. Soon after the shooting, a man called the police from a public phone booth. In a calm voice, he reported the crime and then said something shocking. He claimed responsibility not only for the Blue Rock Springs attack, but also for the earlier murders on Lake Herman Road. After delivering the message, the caller quietly hung up. The police suddenly realized they might be dealing with a serial killer. The two attacks seemed connected, and the same person could be responsible for both crimes. But at that moment, investigators had no idea that this mysterious killer would soon begin sending letters to newspapers, turning the case into a national mystery that people would talk about for decades. After the second attack in July 1969, the investigation into the mysterious killer continued. Police were trying to connect the two shootings and find the man responsible. But only a few weeks later, something very unusual happened. The killer decided to contact the media directly. This decision would turn the case into a national sensation and introduce the world to the name Zodiac Killer. On July 31st, 1969, three major newspapers in Northern California received strange letters in the mail. The newspapers were the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each newspaper received a similar letter written by someone claiming to be the killer responsible for the recent murders. The letters were disturbing. In them, the writer described details about the attacks that had not been shared with the public. Because of this, police believed the writer might truly be the person responsible. But the letters also contained something even more unusual. Inside each envelope was part of a coded message. These coded messages were made of strange symbols, shapes, and letters arranged in a complex pattern. The writer demanded that the newspapers publish the coded messages on the front page of their papers. He threatened that if the codes were not printed, he would go on a killing spree and murder many more people. This threat created fear among both the police and the public. The newspapers had a difficult decision to make. On one hand, they did not want to help a criminal spread fear. On the other hand, they were worried about the threat and wanted the public to help solve the codes. Eventually, the newspapers decided to publish the letters and the strange ciphers. When the letters appeared in print, thousands of readers became curious. People all over the country started trying to solve the mysterious codes. Teachers, students, mathematicians, and amateur puzzle lovers studied the strange symbols. Everyone hoped they could uncover the identity of the killer. A few days later, another letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner. In this message, the writer complained that people did not fully believe he was the killer. To prove it, he included more details about the crimes. At the end of the letter, he signed it with a strange name. For the first time, he called himself the Zodiac. The letter also included a strange symbol that looked like a circle with a cross through it. This symbol would become known as the Zodiac symbol. From that moment on, the mysterious criminal became known to the public as the Zodiac Killer. Fear quickly spread across Northern California. Parents worried about their children going out at night. Young couples became afraid to visit quiet parks and parking areas. The idea that a killer was not only committing murders, but also communicating with newspapers made the situation even more frightening. At the same time, the Zodiac seemed to enjoy the attention. His letters showed that he wanted people to read his messages and try to understand his strange mind. The case was no longer just a police investigation. It had become a public mystery, and people everywhere were now watching closely, waiting to see what message the Zodiac would send next. When the strange letters from the Zodiac Killer were published in newspapers, people quickly became fascinated by the coded messages. The killer had sent a cryptogram made of hundreds of strange symbols. These symbols looked like circles, triangles, letters, and other unusual shapes. Many people believed that if the code could be solved, it might reveal the identity of the killer. The full message was actually divided into 3 parts, and together it formed what is now known as the 408 symbol cipher. Each of the 3 newspapers had received one section of the code. When the newspapers printed the symbols, readers all across the country began trying to solve the puzzle. Some people worked alone at home, while others worked together with friends or family members. The mystery quickly became one of the biggest puzzles in the United States. For several days, no one was able to break the code. Even experienced investigators and experts struggled to understand the strange pattern of symbols. The killer had clearly taken time to create something complicated. But the solution did not come from professional detectives. Instead, it came from an ordinary couple who enjoyed solving puzzles. Their names were Donald Hardin and Betty Hardin. They lived in Salinas, California. Donald was a school teacher, and Betty enjoyed reading and solving word puzzles. When they saw the code printed in the newspaper, they decided to try solving it together at their kitchen table. The Hardins believed the message might contain common words or phrases. They started looking for patterns in the symbols. One idea they had was that the killer might be talking about himself. Because of this, they guessed that the message might include the word I. Slowly, they began replacing symbols with letters and testing their ideas. After many hours of work, their method started to reveal parts of the message. Piece by piece, the mysterious symbols turned into readable words. Soon, the Hardins realized they had cracked the code. When the message was finally solved, the result was both shocking and disturbing. The writer talked about enjoying killing people because it was exciting for him. He also claimed that the people he killed would become his servants in the afterlife. The message showed that the writer had a very strange and dark way of thinking. However, there was one surprising detail. Even though the killer had promised that the code would reveal his identity, the message did not include his name. The code only revealed his disturbing thoughts, not who he really was. Police hoped that solving the cipher would lead them directly to the killer, but that did not happen. Instead, the message only made the mystery deeper. The public now knew that the Zodiac wanted attention and enjoyed creating puzzles for people to solve. Over the next months and years, the Zodiac would continue sending more coded messages. Some of these codes were much more difficult than the first one. In fact, several of them remained unsolved for decades. The coded messages became one of the most famous parts of the Zodiac mystery. They turned the case into a strange mix of crime investigation and puzzle solving. Even today, many amateur code breakers around the world still study the Zodiac symbols, hoping they might discover something that investigators missed long ago. While people across the country were trying to solve the codes sent by the Zodiac Killer, the mystery became even more frightening. The killer was not finished. In September 1969, another violent attack happened in Northern California, and this time the killer behaved in a very strange and dramatic way. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, a young couple went to relax near Lake Berryessa, a quiet lake surrounded by hills and trees. The couple was Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. They were enjoying a peaceful day by the water, talking and resting on a blanket near the lake. Suddenly, a man appeared from behind some trees. What made the moment even more terrifying was the way the man looked. He was wearing a strange black hood that covered his entire head. The hood had a symbol on the front, a circle with a cross through it. This symbol was the same one that had appeared in the Zodiac's letters to newspapers. The man approached the couple slowly. At first, he claimed he was an escaped prisoner who needed money and a car to escape. However, the situation quickly became more dangerous. The man ordered Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard to lie down on the ground. He then tied them up using pieces of rope. Once the couple was tied, the attacker suddenly pulled out a knife. In a shocking act of violence, he stabbed both victims multiple times. After the attack, the man calmly walked away from the scene, leaving the couple injured near the lake. Despite his injuries, Brian Hartnell survived the attack and was later able to describe the strange hooded man. Sadly, Cecilia Shepard later died from her injuries at the hospital. The Lake Berryessa attack shocked investigators because the killer had changed his method. In earlier attacks, he used a gun. This time, he used a knife and wore a frightening costume. Before leaving the area, the attacker did something even more unusual. He walked over to Brian Hartnell's car and wrote a message on the car door using a black marker. The message included the dates of the previous attacks and the strange cross-circle symbol associated with the Zodiac. This was another way for the killer to claim responsibility for the crimes. Only a few weeks later, the killer struck again. On October 11, 1969, a taxi driver named Paul Stein picked up a passenger in San Francisco. The passenger asked to be driven to a neighborhood called Presidio Heights. During the ride, everything seemed normal. However, when the taxi reached its destination, the passenger suddenly pulled out a gun and shot Paul Stein. The driver died inside the taxi. The killer then took a piece of the driver's shirt before calmly walking away from the scene. This crime was different from the earlier attacks because it happened in a busy city neighborhood rather than a quiet park. Several witnesses saw the suspect leaving the area and called the police. For a short moment, officers were very close to catching the killer. But because of a communication mistake in the police radio report, officers were looking for the wrong suspect description. As a result, the Zodiac slipped away into the night. The murders and attacks made the Zodiac one of the most feared criminals in California. His strange symbol, his letters, and his unpredictable attacks created fear across the region. Yet even with witnesses and growing evidence, the mysterious killer remained unknown. As the crimes of the Zodiac Killer continued to frighten the public, police departments across Northern California worked together to find the mysterious murderer. Detectives collected fingerprints, studied handwriting samples from the letters, and interviewed many possible suspects. Despite years of investigation, the true identity of the Zodiac remained unknown. Over time, several suspects were considered, but none could be proven to be the killer. One of the most famous suspects was Arthur Lee Allen. Allen lived in California and had a history that made investigators suspicious. Some people who knew him told police that Allen had strange interests and sometimes spoke about violent ideas. According to reports, a friend even told police that Allen once mentioned wanting to call himself Zodiac and talked about hunting people like animals. This information immediately caught the attention of investigators. Police searched Allen's home and questioned him several times. They looked for weapons, coded messages, or anything that might connect him to the crimes. Some details seem suspicious. For example, Alan owned a watch made by the Zodiac brand that had the same cross-circle symbol that appeared in the killer's letters. This discovery made investigators even more curious. However, other evidence did not support the idea that Alan was the Zodiac. Handwriting experts compared Alan's writing to the letters sent by the killer and concluded that they did not match. Later, when DNA testing technology improved, investigators also tested evidence from the Zodiac letters. The DNA results did not clearly match Arthur Lee Allen either. Because of this, police were never able to charge him with the crimes. There were also many other possible suspects. Over the years, police and amateur investigators suggested dozens of names. Some suspects were people who lived near the crime scenes, while others were people with criminal histories or strange behavior. Each suspect created new theories and debates about who the Zodiac might have been. One major challenge in the investigation was the lack of strong physical evidence. The crimes happened quickly, often at night, and sometimes in isolated places. Witness descriptions of the suspect were limited and sometimes different from one another. This made it very difficult for police to build a clear profile of the killer. Another problem was that the Zodiac seemed to enjoy confusing investigators. His letters sometimes included clues, but it was never clear if the clues were real or simply meant to mislead the police. Some messages even appeared to contain false information designed to waste the investigators' time. As the years passed, the case grew colder. Detectives continued reviewing evidence and following new leads, but no suspect could be proven guilty beyond doubt. The mystery only grew deeper as time went on. Even today, many people believe the identity of the Zodiac Killer may still be hidden somewhere in old evidence or forgotten records. Investigators continue to study the case, hoping that modern technology or new information might finally reveal the truth. Until then, the Zodiac remains one of the most famous unidentified criminals in history, and the question of who he really was continues to puzzle both detectives and the public. Even after the last known attacks, the mystery of the Zodiac Killer did not disappear. Instead, the story continued through the strange letters that the killer kept sending to newspapers and police. These messages kept the case alive and made the Zodiac one of the most famous unsolved criminal mysteries in history. In the months and years after the murders, several more letters arrived at newspapers such as the San Francisco Chronicle. Many of these letters included the same circle and cross symbol that the Zodiac used as his signature. Some letters contained more coded messages, while others included threats or strange statements about the killer's beliefs. In one shocking case, the Zodiac even mailed a piece of a victim's shirt to prove that he was truly the person responsible for the crimes. However, as time passed, investigators began to receive many letters from people pretending to be the Zodiac. Some individuals wanted attention, while others tried to confuse the police. These fake messages made the investigation even more difficult because detectives had to carefully examine each letter to determine if it was real or a hoax. One of the most fascinating parts of the Zodiac mystery has always been the coded messages. The first major cipher was solved in 1969 by Donald Hardin and Betty Hardin, but several other codes remained unsolved for many years. Amateur codebreakers around the world continued trying to understand the Zodiac's puzzles. In 2020, more than 50 years after the original crimes, a team of independent codebreakers finally solved one of the most famous unsolved messages. The team included David Orenchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl van Eyck. Using computer programs and careful analysis, they were able to break a cipher that had confused experts for decades.